When we think about life in the 1800s, we often imagine horse-drawn carriages, gentlemen in top hats, and ladies with parasols. But behind the romanticized depictions, there's a more realistic story waiting to be told, one that's often darker, grittier, and more challenging than we dare to imagine. Get ready to have your perceptions shattered as we uncover the shocking truths about how people actually lived in the 1800s. Life in the 1800s was a constant struggle for survival. People faced unimaginable hardships, from disease and poverty to a lack of basic necessities like clean water and sanitation. The Industrial Revolution was still in its infancy, and most people lived in rural areas, relying on manual labor to get by. Cities were overcrowded, dirty, and disease-ridden, with inadequate housing and limited access to health care. It was a time when the strong survived, and the weak perished. Disease was rampant, and medical care was primitive at best. You could die from something as simple as a cut or a cold, and childbirth was a leading cause of death for women. Even the wealthy were not immune to the ravages of disease, with tuberculosis, cholera, and typhoid fever being just a few of the many deadly illnesses that plagued society. The divide between the rich and the poor was stark. The wealthy few lived in opulent mansions with servants, carriages, and every luxury imaginable, while the poor were forced to live in squalid conditions, fighting for scraps to survive. With no social safety net, poverty was a constant threat, and many people were forced to turn to crime or prostitution just to get by. In the 1800s, daily life was a grind. People worked long hours in hazardous conditions, with few protections or rights. Factory workers, including children as young as 5, toiled for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, with no vacation time, sick leave, or benefits. Farmers worked from dawn till dusk, 7 days a week, with no respite from the elements or the relentless labor. Family dynamics were also vastly different from what we're used to today. Women's rights were non-existent, and they were treated as little more than property. Marriage was often a business arrangement rather than a romantic partnership, and women had no say in their own lives. Children were seen as economic assets, sent to work from a young age, and were often subjected to physical and emotional abuse. Social norms were also much stricter than today. People were expected to conform to certain standards of behavior, with no room for individuality or creativity. Women were expected to be demure, submissive, and domestic, while men were expected to be strong, stoic, and providers. Any deviation from these norms was met with social ostracism, ridicule, or even violence. But perhaps the most shocking truth about 1800s life is the reality of child labor. Children as young as 3 were forced to work in factories, mines, and mills, often for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. They were subjected to physical and emotional abuse, with no protections or safeguards in place. It was a time when children were treated as little more than animals, forced to work until they were exhausted, and discarded when they were no longer useful. The healthcare system was also a nightmare. Doctors were often quacks with little medical knowledge, and treatments were barbaric and ineffective. Surgery was performed without anesthesia, and patients were often left to die from infections or blood loss. It was a time when medicine was more of an art than a science, and people were often more likely to die from medical treatment than from the disease itself. But despite all these challenges, people persevered, adapting to their circumstances in ways that would be unimaginable to us today. They found ways to survive, to thrive, and to create, despite the obstacles in their path. In conclusion, life in the 1800s was brutal, harsh, and unforgiving. It was a time of survival, not of comfort, convenience, or luxury. It's a stark reminder of how far we've come, and how much we take for granted today. So, what do you think about these shocking truths about 1800s life? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you're new here, consider subscribing for more videos that challenge common perceptions. And if you want to explore more historical misconceptions, check out our video on the dark side of ancient civilizations. Thanks for watching.